All right, so my camera cut off when I was filming, so I'm just going to go over it with you. So I pulled the cylinder head and cylinder off the bike. The power valves are in pretty dang good shape. There's not a lot of carbon buildup on any of them. And the cylinder head is in really good shape. Sometimes you expect to see wrist pin bearing damage, but this one is pretty cherry. It's pretty good. The cylinder is in also pretty dang good shape. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but there are no flakes or chipping happening with the Nicosil lining. I don't know how worn down it is, but it looks good. So coming over to the engine, so the piston is relatively new. It doesn't have a lot of time on it. Just judging from the carbon or lack of carbon buildup on top, it just looks pretty fresh, and there's not a lot of, well, yeah, you can kind of see some wear on there on the piston and under bottom. So the rocking and knocking that I was hearing on the flywheel when I was turning back and forth is this. So the wrist pin bearing is going out. It was on its way to destruction, and I guess I rescued it in time before it took out a lot of stuff with it. So my theory is what happened is that at some point one of the previous owners rebuilt this bike, put a new piston in it, and I think at some point this bike was cared for pretty nicely in its past, but they sold it to somebody who didn't give a shit about it, and it was clearly left out in the elements for a little while. And the biggest problem with this bike is that the previous owners did not ever clean or change the air filter, so that thing was just caked on with mud. There was mud inside the airbox. There was dirt and grit inside of the airbox boot, so all that dirt was being passed inside the engine. And because the wrist pin bearings are very small, kind of dainty little long pieces of metal, they're the first things that are probably going to go if you're sandblasting the inside of this crankcase and cylinder. They'll be the first bearings to go out on it. More than likely, the big end bearing and the crank bearings themselves are also toast. I would definitely want to replace them on this bike at this point. So that's going to be the plan, is to, over the next month or so, I'll just go ahead and take this motor apart and maybe get the cases. I'll have to get the cases cleaned up. I got to do a weld job on that counter shaft guard bung, which is, you can't really see it over there. I'm going to try to show it. I got to do a little bit of welding on that, but I want to get these cases cleaned up really nice, and maybe the same thing with the cylinder. And then we'll rebuild it with fresh crank seals. Crank bearings, I'll have to rebuild the crankshaft assembly and put a fresh piston and big end or wrist pin bearing. And I'll go through the transmission too to make sure there's no bearings in there that are also kind of janky. But fortunately, this is separate from what's, this got its own separate compartment. But I want to make sure there's no damage or anything inside the transmission, and all that looks tight. There's no broken gears or anything. What I was also really kind of surprised about is there's no play whatsoever in the shock linkage. Normally on a thrashed 125, you'll hear it kind of clock, 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 clock as you lift it up and down. This one is tight. This is very, very tight. I was really, really surprised. So the shock itself doesn't look like it's leaking. It looks like it's missing its bump though. Yeah, it's missing its bump. So yeah, maybe the shock needs to come apart. Anyways, that's gonna be the plan. Over the next month or two, I'm gonna, I guess, rebuild this bike, and I'm not gonna make it look showroom condition because it's very expensive and it doesn't pay off. So this will be at least a bike that hopefully I can get rebuilt. And this is the previous owner of the previous, so they put their bar way forward. It's kind of funny. It's kind of cool. Yeah, so I'm just gonna rebuild this bike so it'd be fun to ride around and maybe do some vintage racing on it, and maybe I'll sell it after that. So, all right, that's it.